Hello and welcome to the Top Order podcast. Just Stu and Baldy here tonight, and what feels like quite a quiet patch on the cricket calendar, at least here in New Zealand, but still plenty to talk about. England's about to play Sri Lanka, South Africa's tour the West Indies. We've got some squads and some contract news here in New Zealand, so always love a bit of New Zealand chat. We've got all of that and more coming up right after this. So, Baldy, it's just you and me tonight. How are you, my friend? I said in the opener, it feels kind of a bit quiet now. We've got the IPL's done, the T20 World Cup's done. It's the off season here in New Zealand. But then I just went through and listed all of the series that are coming up and going on. And I think Bangladesh is playing Pakistan as well. The 100's going on. There's actually quite a lot. So, yeah, maybe there's just no quiet times anymore at all.
There aren't any quiet times in cricket. And I'm well, Stuart, thanks for asking. And hello to all of our listeners enjoying bilateral cricket all around the world, actually. Pretty much all nations are involved in some way or shape or form, even if it's women's A cricket like it is with Australia and India at the moment. Australia getting a hiding in their last outing against India in North Queensland, near to my own heart. But yeah, lots of cricket going on in the world, lots of bilateral crickets. Sri Lanka playing Test series and ODI series almost simultaneously. West Indies have gone from getting a shellacking by England in England now that they're playing South Africa at home. Where do we want to go first, mate? Do we want to cover off the New Zealand contract news? Because I know you're dying to talk about it because it's just us on the pod, and you know it's easier to beat me 1-on-1 than it is to beat us down when you're 1-on-3.
Well, I think it might make sense to sort of start there because, you know, staying on the sort of schedule conversation because, look, I mean, you know, for anyone who doesn't know, here in New Zealand over the past week, we've had a couple more players step away from international contracts in favour of franchise opportunities. Devon Conway has, in his case, stepped away to move to a casual contract, which is pretty much what Kane Williamson is on, where it means that he can take up an opportunity in the SAT20 and still sort of be available for New Zealand for all the Test cricket and for the Champions Trophy, you know, in this cycle. So that doesn't seem like a major deal. In Finn Allen's case, he wasn't offered the same option. So he was given a New Zealand contract, accepted one, and then has decided to step away from that. And since that news has come out, it's been announced that he's picked up a 2-year deal with Perth Scorchers. So I guess that being a white ball player, he doesn't really have the same opportunities for New Zealand cricket. They have decided essentially to say, you know, we're not going to offer you this casual contract deal. That casual contract deal is only available for a select number of players who are, I guess, playing all formats and in the upper echelons of those contracts and people we want to retain. So on the back of that, there's been, I don't know, a bit of panic probably around New Zealand. Some New Zealand fans saying, like, is this the beginning of the end or not even the beginning of the end? Because we've seen Adam Milne and Lockie Ferguson in this cycle turn down contracts. We've seen Colin de Gronholm. We've seen Tim Seifert turn down a domestic contract in favour of franchise opportunities. And Trent Boult is obviously the big one who stepped away a couple of years ago and since then has been sporadically available for New Zealand, mainly just for the big tournaments. But, you know, we again don't know if we'll see him again in a New Zealand shirt. So, yeah, I don't know. It's been happening for a while, and I'm keen to get your thoughts as a more neutral observer as to how big a deal this is for New Zealand cricket.
Well, I think the first thing to touch on is that you've rattled off 9 names there. You throw Neil Wagner in, and that's almost an entire first 11 of players, or it's pretty close to a first 11 of players that aren't going to be available for New Zealand in one shape or another throughout the course of New Zealand's cricketing calendar. And that won't be all the time, of course, because Kane will be available for his casual contract, Conway the same. So there are going to be players that are available. But for a small nation like New Zealand, having so many players either not having centralised contracts or not having full-time contracts, it does really test the depth of New Zealand cricket. You throw in there the fact that Neil Wagner has recently retired from the Test arena. Kyle Jamieson is injured for another year. And you can see how the casual fan might be saying that the sky is falling in terms of, you know, availability or depth at that top level. I think what we've got to do, though, is have a look at what is the long-term strategy for New Zealand here in terms of their contracting structure. And I think looking from the outside in, it almost feels like the setup that the All Blacks have. That you've got one or two players each year who have a sabbatical or some overseas contract situation that allows them to go off and earn big dollars and still be available to play for the All Blacks when it matters most. So you can only hope, if you're a New Zealand fan, Stu, and I want to come back to you and get your view, but you can only hope that New Zealand cricket are doing this with a view to going, okay, well, what tournaments do we want to be able to take our best side to? Is that the Champions Trophy next year? Is it the World Cup T20 the year after? Like, where do New Zealand want to have their best side? And that's what they need to be working towards. I also think that they need to look after their superstar players in terms of having them be able to go and earn money where possible. And I think that's why you've seen Conway get offered a casual contract, Kane get offered a casual contract, Milne, Ferguson, etc. These are first choice, almost first name on the team sheet players, depending on the format. And I think New Zealand have recognised that they need to look after them, because the alternative is that they go and play franchise cricket all year round, and New Zealand cricket don't have access to them at all.
Yeah, I think the challenge for me when I look at it, I mean, I think there's, I think there's some positives on, the sky is falling front on when you think that it seems, at least at this stage, that all the top players are keen to play in all the major tournaments for the format that they, if they play all formats, so someone like Kane and Devon Conway, they want to play, it seems like they want to be available for pretty much every test, and they want to be available for all of the ICC major tournaments. And, we saw that with Trent Boult. He's still been available for the major tournaments. So I think that's a plus side that we haven't got to the point where, not yet at least, where people are going, okay, well, there's a test series in the World Test Championship, but I can go off and make, a certain amount of money off it at the SAT20, so I'm going to skip this home series against Sri Lanka or whatever. We haven't got to that point yet. I do think that the probably the biggest issue I can see in this is that the franchise tournaments and where they are lining up doesn't bode well for the New Zealand, just our home summer. The big, we've seen the SAT20, we've seen the BBL, we've got the ILT20 or whatever the one over in Dubai and stuff, or the UAE is called. They're all in that New Zealand window, and they're all in, like, normally when we'd play our tests. And basically what it's meaning, I think, if this is going to continue, is that New Zealand's only going to have a very short span of time really to play any test series if they want players to still be able to go and play those series. So maybe in November you're going to have a month, and maybe in March. And, again, if we're going to have certain ICC tournaments sometimes factoring into these, in that time frame as well, it really I think that is what's going to put the pressure on New Zealand cricket, because, I don't know, it feels inevitable. We've talked a little bit about what are we going to, one of our topics we'd like to dive into at some point being what's cricket going to look like in 5 years. It feels to me for New Zealand cricket that the central contract is probably going to have to shift towards more of a casual contract, or some sort of, tiered scenario for the, how they work it with all of these players, because like you said in the opener, that there's so many different, cricket is a 12-month of the year game now for everyone around the world, and there are tournaments that they're going to be able to play in. And I just think that those opportunities are going to be there for our top players, and we're going to have to figure out how we balance that. We've done an okay job so far. I don't know if the communication's been wonderful for the fans looking in. I think, certainly the way that Trent Boult, that situation was handled, I don't know that the basic New Zealand cricket fan really knew, okay, does that mean Trent Boult's available for this tournament or not? And we probably need a bit more, this is how we're going to do things, and this is, maybe they have learnt from that, because that, in the Kane Williamson's case and Devon Conway's case, I think as a New Zealand cricket fan, which tournaments they're going to be available for. But yeah, I don't know. I do think things are going to change over the next few years, and how we look at what the structure is going to be for New Zealand cricket.
I think the real litmus test will be whether or not this is a tipping point, or this is the kind of volume that you're going to see centrally contracted New Zealand players opt out of full-time New Zealand contracts to pursue at least some kind of revenue through franchise cricket. I think the best that New Zealand can hope for, and the best that nations like New Zealand can hope for going forward, is that their players will be available for Test cricket and major tournaments. I think that's the best that New Zealand can really hope for. If you think about the guys who are currently locked in but may have options in a year or two, Glenn Phillips, maybe even Mark Chapman, guys of that nature, Rachin Ravindra, etc., those guys, if they start having to pick and choose, or having the option to pick and choose what they're available for, I think that you're going to have a scenario where lots of nations, and we're now September 2024, we've been talking about this for 5 years, but it's here now, nations having to choose, or players having to choose, whether or not they want to represent their country at major tournaments or not. And the risk that those players are taking is that somebody else steps up and takes their spot. I think it's unlikely because they'll be in the shop window in those franchise tournaments. So there is a real choice now on offer for those players, and it's a shame for nations like New Zealand to not be able to put their best team on the park in their home conditions. And that's not just internationally, but domestically as well. It's a real shame. But, we've been talking about it, as I said, for a long time. It's here now. And New Zealand have got to navigate that alongside all of the other nations, I think, with the exception of probably India, England, and Australia, although Australia are having to make some tough choices as well around availability, and have been doing for the last 18 months.
Oh yeah, it's such a fascinating. I'm so fascinated by the topic in general about where things are going to go, and how the contracting stuff is going to happen. I know we don't want to spend the whole podcast talking about New Zealand. I think we'll probably talk about New Zealand. We have just named a test squad to go to Afghanistan, or to play against Afghanistan, and a couple of tests against Sri Lanka. A very spin heavy squad. Ajaz Patel returns. Michael Bracewell returns. There's talk that Tim Southee might not play in all of those games, which will be very interesting in terms of the fact that he's our test captain. But young guys, Will O'Rourke and Ben Sears in the mix now as well. So yeah, it's, as I've been saying for a while now, it's an interesting sort of transition point for New Zealand, because after those 3 tests, we've got 3 tests against India in India as well. So it's I think this core group that they've picked for that squad will be there, for the next few months, and it's 3 tests in September, and then 3 tests in October over in India. So yeah, a lot to come for that New Zealand side. But should we go to some Test cricket that actually has been played now? Because the West Indies South Africa series, Baldy, I've really enjoyed this. It's it might be down to the fact a little bit that it's one of the only series here in New Zealand that is live on Sky Sports and actually played at a reasonable time for us to get some coverage and get a look in. And so we've had all the franchise tournaments like the 100 that's going on, but we haven't had a lot of coverage of that here in New Zealand. So what did you enjoy about this series? Because I know it's one that has kind of taken your eye, or maybe it's something you didn't enjoy about this series.
I haven't enjoyed very much of it at all, Stu, and
No.
and ask me why I haven't enjoyed it.
Yeah, what's been the problem? Because I enjoyed it very much.
I haven't enjoyed it because I have been hoping for many, many years now that the West Indies would find a middle order that's capable of putting up runs on a regular basis and getting them into winning positions in test matches, because they've clearly got the bowlers that can hold their own, in my view. And speaking of contracts, it was wonderful to see Shamar Joseph stick his hand up and say publicly again, and he said it, I think, in the Australia series when they were in Australia playing, and he was bursting onto the scene in that wonderful victory for the West Indies at the Gabba, that he, no matter what money comes his way, he will always be available to play Test cricket for the West Indies. So that's a real boon for them. The challenge, of course, is that as well as their bowlers are producing, their batters are just not producing on a consistent basis. And it was really frustrating to follow that Test series where on multiple occasions in each Test match, the West Indies got themselves into, if not in front of the game, and then let themselves down with sometimes just half an hour of play or an hour of play where they lost wickets and clumps and weren't able to drive home an advantage that they worked so hard to achieve. So that was a really frustrating period for me. You have a look at this most recent Test. They had South Africa all out for 160, and then by the end of day one had slumped themselves to 97 for 7, and all of a sudden South Africa were back in the match. So they worked so hard, that cricket side, that West Indies side, to put themselves into a decent position in test matches, and they just can't capitalise in any way, shape or form. And it's all about the partnerships. They just can't get big partnerships going, 100, 150 run partnerships. They seem to, guys get to 20, 30, 35, 45, etc., all up and down the order. I mean, we've seen Joseph make runs. We saw Gudakesh Moti make 45. There are contributions there, but there's no... it's hard to say it because we were so blessed for so many years, but there's no Shiv Chanderpaul, there's no Lara, there's no anchor in the middle order for people to bat around, who's averaging 45 plus, and then you can craft totals around that. So yeah, I expect so much from West Indian cricket because I want them to succeed, and it's just been frustrating to watch them sort of battle their way through this test series.
I think that's just down to an experience, though, isn't it? I mean, that batting lineup. I mean, we talked about it while they were over in England. There's some talent there. We can see it. We can see guys like Alec Athanase and Kameem Hodge, and even. I mean, you guys quite like Makai Louis. I'm starting to get a bit worried about him. The fact that he just seems to find a way to get out, kind of nicks one off or hits one up in the air, or I'm more concerned maybe than I was a few tests ago. But I think that's I would say that's the reason that we're seeing 20s and 30s and the not kicking on, because I mean, you even look at that last test that they were about 90 odd for 3. Hodge and Athanase were in. They were starting to build that partnership, chasing about 260 to win. And it was at a time, and I kind of just thought, look, they get another 30 or 40 here. They get halfway, 3 down, and South Africa's going to start to worry here. This is going to really put the pressure on. But Rabada strikes, and then, 3 wickets go down for 10 runs. And, that sort of took all the wind out of the chase. Like you say, Moti kind of, rebuilt that chase with Josh Da Silva, and the lower order sort of hung in there. And at points looked like they might, again, turn it around. And I think they got to 200 with Moti in, and you sort of thought, oh, maybe they can kind of come up with something amazing here. But, yeah, I just sort of feel like they've still just got to stick with these guys, and I'm pleased that there is a good chunk of test matches for them coming up. I think I can't quite remember off the top of my head who they've got, but I think in the next 6 months there's a couple more series to play. So I'd like to see this group maintain itself for the next little while, and I think hopefully we're going to see that, especially the likes of Athanase, who I really do enjoy. I think he's got a decent amount about him. He does look to have kind of the right temperament and got a lot of shots in him. So, yeah, I sort of hope that with that experience, they can then move on and start to actually turn these positions into test wins.
Yeah, they have to. And, I think you've got to ignore the averages of all of these players, because if you have a look at domestic cricket in the West Indies, there aren't many players behind them pulling up trees. So you have to stick with these guys. I think, if you're concerned about Makai Lewis, I'm a big Son of Shiv fan. I think Tashnarayan Chanderpaul is a made test cricketer. I think he's one of the only guys that I really think, despite his average, has got all the skills to play test cricket, and he just needs 20 test matches. I know he's played a few now and his results have been inconsistent, but they've just got to stick with those guys that they've got in there now. Throw Chanderpaul in and stick with those guys. I think they need one more batter in that lineup. I think, Holder is half a position too high at 6, maybe one position too high at 6. But I think also that Josh Da Silva's not quite a number 6 as well. So he's to me, he's a 6.5. Mm-hmm. Holder's a 6.5, 7.5. So yeah, if they had 5 guns and Holder and Da Silva, that's a great batting lineup, but they don't at the moment. I think they're just half a batter light as well. So yeah, it's a real hard slog for the West Indies, but I think they've got to pick and stick now, because the bowling attack is fine. Seales, Joseph, those guys are the goods for the West Indies. You throw the spinners in there, Warrikan and Gudakesh Moti, etc. I think they've got the bowling attack to take 20 wickets in a lot of different conditions, maybe not in India, but in most conditions. And, they've just got to find the consistency in their batting. And I'll tell you what, they've got to take care of their fielding too. If they're dropping catches, they're not helping their bowlers out, and that's going to really hurt them when the conditions are tough.
Totally. I mean, you mentioned bowling there. I said I enjoyed this series, and bowling was the main reason why. I loved watching Jayden Seales in this series. He was fantastic. I will, don't worry, I will turn this to spin at the end of the Seales praise. I will always make sure that happens. But the way he was able to, the way he cleaned up Dazorzi with that big in swinger that just cleaned out the poles, sent those flying, repeated the dose later to Rabada. With him and Joseph bowling in tandem when they were going, at their best in this certainly in the second test. There's such a great combo because Seales does it in the air, although he can get a bit off the pitch as well, but he was doing it in the air, and Joseph's running in on that slight angle and just angling it in and then nipping it off the pitch and stuff as well. So yeah, there's some serious talent there. And as you say, Alzari Joseph didn't play in this game. They've got Kemar Roach and still going around and doing the job as well. So yeah, some fantastic work. And I think, to flip it over to South Africa, they, you see from them, I'm just so impressed with the quality of seam bowlers in general at the moment. They bring in Nandre Burger, who I really enjoyed watching, way back to when India went over to South Africa. I really enjoyed, his start to his test career, and it was great to see him ripping in again. And I just sort of start to feel like maybe South Africa missed an opportunity here when they didn't bring their full strength side to New Zealand back in 2023, because I really think this, as much as the South African hierarchy has decided we're going to, we've got to prioritise this SAT20, we've got to build this up, this is our pathway to, improving the game here in South Africa. I do feel like this side, the South African side, has the ingredients to really push for the World Test Championship. And, maybe we'll come back to that in a second, because I think that there is still a pathway for them to make it into the final. But maybe a word on Keshav Maharaj, Baldy, because he's sort of, I feel like, almost an unsung hero for South Africa in the way that he's gone about his game for quite a while now. And I think he's just become maybe in this series became the leading spin bowler for South Africa ever in tests, I think. So look, he's just done a fantastic job and sort of found his way now into becoming a 3-format player and really contributing in all formats.
This is going to sound weird to say this, because I'm going to go in and praise one of the other South African bowlers very heavily in my follow-up comments, but Keshav Maharaj is actually the most important bowler in that South African unit, because the drop-off from him in Test cricket to the next available bowler that can replace him is significant. In fact, it's more significant than any of the drop-off from any of the pace bowlers. If you consider the likes of Janssen and Rabada and Ngidi and Norkia and Bartman and Berger, and we're not even talking about the all-rounders like Philukwayo and Fan Mulder and so forth. The drop-off from any one of those guys going down and another bowler stepping up to take their place is, it's a sliding scale. But I look at the drop-off from Maharaj to anyone else really as a really steep cliff. So he's their most important bowler in terms of being able to balance their squad, being able to offer them different kinds of roles in all conditions. He might not necessarily take 9 for in India, but he's going to be able to give them that balance and allow them to attack with their seam bowlers. And in seam-friendly conditions, those seam bowlers are terrific.
You said you were about to praise someone else. Who did you have in mind?
Well, I just wanted to give Rabada some praise, because we talked about him in the countdown 100 best cricketing Hall of Fame Test player for men thing that we
Rabada.
Broader Rabada indeed. But he's approaching 300 Test wickets now. His average is still under 23 and his strike rate is still under 40. And we had a conversation off air about, what were Shane Bond's numbers, very, very similar in terms of strike rate and average. They are all-time figures for a guy who's got 100 wickets, for a guy who's got 200, for a guy who's about to get 300 wickets. So I think we've got to give him some praise, because in a year or in the last 12 months where we've had Broad retire and we've had Anderson retire and we've been talking about Jasprit Bumrah non-stop, and lots of people talk about the contributions of Mitchell Starc and Patrick Cummins and, Gus Atkinson bursting onto the scene, and these fantastic West Indian bowlers that we've got. And then, Theekshana and Patirana in Sri Lanka, who's bowling well. South African fast bowlers, as good as they are, don't always get the praise that they deserve. So I just wanted to give Rabada a shout out as he nears that magical 300 wicket milestone for South Africa, because he is so underrated in terms of what he has produced for his country. And look, fingers crossed that he stays playing Test cricket, continues to play Test cricket, because that was one of the questions we asked in that Hall of Fame session was, how much are we actually going to see a guy like that play Test cricket for South Africa? So it's great to see him continuing to contribute and making a difference when it really counts. As you said, that game was in the balance, and then Kagiso Rabada came in and ripped it wide open.
Oh, totally. I think I had him above Broad in my own personal rankings at that time. And look, that Broad made that look a bit silly by the way he sort of ended his career potentially, but. Yeah, I think if they played the same amount of tests, Rabada, that's the thing about Rabada, right? His numbers are just they're not going down. They're not getting worse. That's what you sort of think. He I think maybe at that time had about 200 wickets, and we were kind of like, okay, well, he's had a great start to his career, even though 200 wickets is a heck of a lot of wickets for just the start of your career. But we were thinking, okay, maybe he'll regress, but it's just not happening so far, and he's certainly, leading the pack in terms of the bowlers with that amount of wickets in Test cricket at the moment. So, yeah, I just think, that's sort of one of the reasons why I said that. I just think the World Test Championship, there are various teams have got varying levels of games left to go, and I think ultimately it probably is going to come down to whether India can take games off Australia in the Border Gavaskar Trophy. If they can do that, I think that's going to open the door to probably to England and South Africa, if they can deal with their own home conditions and home tests. So I think South Africa, after this, I think they go and they have 2 tests against Bangladesh away. They've got 2 tests against Sri Lanka at home, 2 tests against Pakistan at home. And it sort of feels to me a bit like they could be in a situation like New Zealand was in 2021, where they get to the start of their home summer and they go, okay, well, India's managed to get 2 tests, and it was 2-2 against India, Australia in the Border Gavaskar. And we've been able, we now know that if we win 4 tests in a row, we can sneak past Australia and make our way into the top 2 for this final. So, yeah, we'll see if that eventuates. And that's why I sort of think maybe they'll regret, sending not a top strength side here to New Zealand and coming away with an 0-2 for them. But, we'll see. And that probably takes us into the England-Sri Lanka series, because I think both of us are thinking this is going to be a 2-0 series for England, despite the fact that Sri Lanka has just managed to beat India for I think the first time in 27 years in a white ball series at least. But what are we thinking here as we move to England, Baldy? Is this just done and dusted for England?
Well, let's give Sri Lanka some praise for that victory over India, because I pilloried them during the World Cup. Let's be honest, they did not have a great World Cup. They are battling all sorts of off the field challenges all the time, Sri Lankan cricket. So for them to get on the park, they've had success in the Women's Asia Cup as well. So let's give them credit for that. They've had success over India in both the T20s. Didn't quite win the series, I don't think. But they did have success in the ODIs, won 2-0 with a tied game. So that is a fantastic result for Sri Lankan cricket. And I think if you're a Sri Lankan cricket fan, and I know there are many here in New Zealand, particularly this part of New Zealand, that there will be high hopes for that team to be able to carry that momentum, carry that form forward into the England Test series. But I think there's a very, very big difference. Even as good as India are as an ODI side, even though they sent, maybe not their strongest side in the world, I think there's a very, very big conditions shock, culture shock, if you like, of playing India in the subcontinent to then having to go straight to England and prepare for this English juggernaut that is effectively playing ODI cricket, but in conditions that suit them over 5 days and with different coloured clothing.
Yeah, totally. And not many players in that Sri Lanka squad, in the white ball squad, that are in this Test lineup. They're not many at all, I actually think. And the Sri Lanka side is actually quite an old team. I don't know if I think that'd probably be my biggest concern. If look, I don't know about a huge amount about the depth of Sri Lankan cricket in terms of what's coming underneath. But when I look at Karunaratne, Matthews, Chandimal, all 34 plus, Matthews and Karunaratne, 36 and 37, I think. And Matthews, it looked like he was phasing out, a few years ago. And I don't know if he's been asked to hang in there or if he wants to hang in there, and they've decided, look, you're still good enough, you're still contributing, so we want you here. But I think that'd be my concern when you look through that lineup. There's a lot of players over 30, and look, I know New Zealand have had the same criticism about our side, but I think we've probably the guys that we've got there have probably built up enough credit to still be around there, and at least New Zealand it seems, are trying to bring through some of those younger players, and Phillips and Ravindra and Sears and O'Rourke. So I think that's probably the bigger concern for Sri Lanka. And then when I look at this lineup, I think about someone like Prabath Jayasuriya as a real one of their big strike weapons. Although he's only played 12 tests, but he's taken 71 wickets in his 12 tests, which is pretty remarkable. He's someone that I've certainly got my eye on for when we go over to Sri Lanka as someone that I'm concerned about. But again, in England, what kind of an impact is he going to be able to have? And it's probably going to be more, Kumar and Rajitha potentially making more of an impact with the ball. But what do you reckon on the England side that Stokes' injury is actually going? How much of an impact is that going to have? Because he's even when we talked about our influential cricketers last week, and all of us were sort of throwing Brendan McCullum's name out, and Binksy is very quick to sort of jump on the back of that and say, look, you can have Brendan McCullum on that list as long as you're going to put Ben Stokes, part of Ben Stokes' face alongside, and the Bazball. McCullum has taken a lot of that limelight, but I think in English circles, at least, if Binksy is anything to go by, Stokes is almost just as much, it maybe if not more, of a talisman for how England is playing their cricket than McCullum is.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And the big test for the squad mentality of this Bazball movement is whether they can continue to make the same decisions, seek the same outcomes, play with the same freedom under a different captain in Ollie Pope. I have no doubt that Ollie Pope is going to give the players the same degree of freedom that Stokes would. He's not going to come in and ask them to play a different way under his leadership. But the question remains, I think, to what extent are England going to be able to achieve the same level of success, the same level of momentum that they would have under Stokes now that they're under Ollie Pope? Let's not forget, 2 of their top 6 are going to change for this Test series. So we're going to have no Zach Crawley at the top, and we've seen, as much as Ben Duckett has been fantastic, Zach Crawley, I think, as much as anybody, sets the tone for this side opening the batting, because you only have to go back to the first ball of the Ashes series in England, where Zach Crawley pumped the first ball of the series on the up through point for 4, to see what kind of a player he has become in that Bazball era. So they're going to have to replace Zach Crawley, and they're going to have to replace their number 5, which is a big part, or their number 6, actually, depending on where kind of, Harry Brook is going to slide into in terms of the order. But Dan Lawrence is going to come in. he's going to be playing out of position, it looks. They've added Jordan Cox to the squad. So we'll see what happens, whether he comes in or what they do in terms of all-rounders. Does Smith slide up to 6? Do they pick Wokes at 7? So not only do they have to find Stokes' leadership, they've got to find his runs, and they've got to find his overs from somewhere. And I think that's where they're going to miss him as much as anything else, because now you're looking at, do you play, and I don't necessarily think that they will, but are England going to play Jamie Smith, who's only played a handful of test matches, at number 6, and then play Wokes at number 7? And Wokes is perfectly capable of playing at number 7, by the way. No stress there. But then you've got Bashir, Stone, Wood, Potts, and Atkinson to round out that order. So, there's some questions to be asked about that England selection. I would love to have Binksy on to sort of probe his analytical mind and see where he would go with it. But where do you see the chips falling here for England? Because while they expect to beat Sri Lanka and beat them well, there's some interesting kind of side play in this series.
Yeah, I think that's probably what is the most interesting for me, that we're going to see some new faces, because, yeah, like you say, we're going to see Dan Lawrence up the top, it looks like, and he's someone who's gone on, pretty much every tour and been, 12th man, or, on the sidelines for every test for the last 2 years, it seems like, and not had an opportunity, not had one come his way, and now he's going to get it. But like you say, he's going to be opening, and that's not something he's done at test level before. And then they've really got a decision, like you said. I think that the decision really is, do we go with more batting and we play Cox, and then we have, Smith and Cox batting 6 and 7, or, whichever order you kind of want to do it, if you want Brook down at below one of those guys. And then you have your 4 bowlers. Or, yeah, I think they would probably go with Wokes at 7, which, again, if you're having Jason Holder at 6, I think you can, Wokes can probably be quite comfortable there at slotting in at 7. And then Potts, I think, would be the one that they would probably want at 8. And then that gives you, Atkinson, Bashir, and a lot of bowling. It almost feels like too much bowling. But if they're going to have Wood in that side as well, maybe it does allow them to just unleash all of those bowlers and, really, really go for it. And then, with Bashir to hold up at the other end, he doesn't really hold up an end, but, in the way that, that spinners do in the Bazball era, he's there to bowl more overs if needed. So I almost think that might be the way they go, that they go with more bowling, at least in that first innings or first test, and say, we're just going to back ourselves to get 20 wickets with this bowling attack faster than you can get 20 wickets against our batting lineup. So, yeah, that's probably what I would do. But it will be an interesting watch. And, on the new names, I'm really excited personally to see Ollie Stone back in there. I had a very small amount to do with him back over playing for Vauxhall Mallards over in the UK. So, yeah, just delighted. He said, it's such a tough run with injuries, and someone who has been able to bowl very, very fast from a young age. And, yeah, it's cool to see him back in the mix. And I hope we see him get an opportunity, because, whenever he's had a chance in the England shirt, he certainly hasn't disgraced himself. So it'd be nice to see him get another crack.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. They've picked a really good bowling attack, I think, for this series against Sri Lanka. They've got plenty of pace. They've got plenty of young guys in there looking to make a name for themselves in Potts and Atkinson. And we forget that Shoaib Bashir hasn't turned 21 yet. So this is a young attack led by Mark Wood at 34 and then Chris Wokes potentially at 35. And then, you've got a really young batting lineup as well, right? So Pope, 26, Brook, 25, Jordan Cox, if he plays, 23. Duckett is and Root, the senior statesman, at 29 and 33, respectively. Dan Lawrence still only 27, and Harry Brook 24. So lots of young players in that lineup. They're going to need Joe Root to provide some leadership alongside Ollie Pope and some starch in that middle order. So I'm quite impressed with how Root has been playing this English summer. So we're looking for him to score some big runs as well. But it's going to be fascinating what they do with selection. It's barely 48 hours until that first test gets underway. I expect that we'll get some news in the next 24 hours or so out of the England camp about which way they're leaning. Just quickly on that Jordan Cox decision, I just had a look at his profile quickly, Stu. Cox's first class average under 40 throughout sort of 51 first class matches. Jamie Smith's is over 40, and Wokes' first class average is over 30. I think it's 32, 33. So, like, if they slot those guys up, they're not losing all that much having Wokes in at 7 as opposed to, you know, having Jordan Cox on the side. So I think it's entirely possible that they go with 5 bowlers. But you've got Dan Lawrence who can bowl a little bit. You've got Joe Root that can bowl a little bit of spin as well. So maybe they go, well, that's our 5th bowling option if we need it. But I would like to see England go all out. If I was an England fan, I'd be like, okay, we're bringing 4 quicks, and we're bringing Shoaib Bashir, and we're going to try and bowl you out for 150 in every innings. Let's go. And we back our 6 batters to get 250 plus, and, you know, game on. So it's going to be a fascinating series. I'm really looking forward to see what they do under Ollie Pope.
I think what you just said, that feels like the let's go kind of attitude. I think you go with those quicks and just see what happens. Anything else before we leave the show for tonight?
Just a congratulations to Ollie Pope, really, on becoming a captain of England. I think he's the 87th captain, something like that, for England in the Test arena. For you, isn't it? Unlucky for some, but not for English players. So, I hope he goes well, because it wasn't that long ago where there were lots of people wondering whether or not Ollie Pope was fit for Test cricket, and he'd been tried. He'd had, you know, prodigious talent, not entirely consistent as we'd expect from a young player finding their way in the international game. But to see him, you know, get some faith in his ability, cement his place in the team, then cement his place at number 3, elevated to the vice captaincy, and now, you know, every young cricketing boy or girl's dream to captain their country, and he's going to go out and do it in a series that we expect England to win and win well. But he's going to have a tremendous amount of freedom to play aggressive cricket, to make aggressive captaincy decisions. And, you know, if cricket has taught us anything, it's the most fun to captain a cricket side when you can be attacking and be aggressive. You know, you can set attacking fields, 4 slips in a gully, short leg, you know, all that kind of stuff, catching covers in the goose box, as Adam would like to say, and, you know, really enjoy your cricket. And I think that there will be no better opportunity to make their debut in a series like this for Ollie Pope. So congratulations to him. I hope he goes well. I'm predicting a whitewash for England over Sri Lanka. But let's hope that Sri Lanka can get something out of this series. What do we expect from them? We expect them to bowl reasonably well, but I think we're wondering where their runs are going to come from, right? So if we're wanting anything for Sri Lankan fans, it's that we can find some starch in that middle order. And maybe if they try out one of their younger players, that they get something out of them. Because there are some young guys in the squad. I think the question is, are they going to get in front of the Chandimal, you know, Angelo Matthews type of, you know, even Sanjay De Silva is well into his 30s now. So it's a question of whether or not they're going to get an opportunity. Take us home, Stu.
Totally. Look, you just mentioned Ollie Pope enjoying the Test match. I hope we all enjoy it as neutral fans and as fans of England and of Sri Lanka. I hope you've all enjoyed the show. Me and Baldy tonight. So I hope we've done the pod justice. But yeah, throw in the comments any of your own suggestions and predictions for this series. It's one that we're all going to be watching. And also give us a like and subscribe and do all of those good things. It really does help people find us and help all the algorithms so that YouTube and all the podcast providers send our show far and wide. So we really appreciate every single time you do that. But for tonight, have a very good night and we'll see you again very, very soon.